Okay, so we're going to get started. My name is Jennifer Brennan, and I just wanted to say welcome to this webinar. I suppose good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. I'm the national contact point for something called the Marie Skłodowska-Curie Actions, and over the next sort of hour or so, hopefully you will find out a lot more about what that's about. So the topic of today's webinar will be fellowship opportunities for non-European researchers in the Marie Skłodowska-Curie Actions. The agenda for this will be approximately 1 hour and 15 minutes. The presentation by the National Contact Point, which is myself, will take about 30 minutes. Then we'll have about 15 minutes of tips from somebody who has been involved in evaluating proposals for this call. Then we'll have a testimonial of about 15 minutes from a successful applicant. Finally, we'll have a few minutes for questions at the end. Just to say that the webinar will be recorded and published on our YouTube channel, given the link below. And the presentations are currently available as handouts. So if you want to look for the handout section of the webinar interface, you should be able to download the presentations as PDF. If not, we will publish them on our Net4Mobility website next week. So the speakers today are myself. I'm the Marie Skłodowska-Curie Action National Contact Point. I'm based in Ireland. The second speaker is Dr. Valerie Heffernan, who works at Maynooth University and who was an evaluator in Marie Skłodowska-Curie Action individual fellowship call for the last couple of years. She was also the vice chair of the evaluation panel in 2013 and 2014. So she has a lot of experience of evaluating in this call. Our final speaker today will be Dr. Pablo Itamatis, who is based in Argentina and who was a Marie Curie Fellow in Switzerland a couple of years ago, and will explain to you about his experience of applying for the fellowship and how it has been beneficial to his career afterwards. Just to outline at the start what Net4Mobility is. So Net4Mobility is the worldwide contact network of Marie Skłodowska-Curie Action's national contact points. And if you visit our website, net4mobility.eu, you will find a map there with NCP contacts in Europe and around the world, and you will find contact details of those people as well. So I'm going to start by explaining what the Marie Skłodowska-Curie Actions are. So they are part of the European Union's Horizon 2020 Research and Innovation Funding Programme, which has €80 billion to spend. It began in 2014 and will continue until the end of 2020. The Marie Skłodowska-Curie Actions fund all areas of research. Absolutely every kind of research that you can think of, we will fund it. And we implement this by offering annual calls for proposals for different kinds of funding. Marie Skłodowska-Curie Actions are a little bit different from other kinds of research funding and focuses less on the research that you can do, but it's important of course, but more on the researchers that take part in the programme and the benefits of that to their training, their career development and their mobility between different countries, but also between different sectors of the economy, linking in with industry or non-governmental organisations or charities or other non-academic organisations too. This is a list of the 5 main Marie Skłodowska-Curie Actions programmes, and today's webinar will focus on the individual fellowships call, which is the next call and has a deadline in September of this year. So, individual fellowships, they are what you would call a personal fellowship. So they're awarded to an individual researcher to spend time in a host organisation within Europe. They support a period of mobility. They're open to what's called experienced researchers, and on the next couple of slides I'll explain what that means. They're fully funded fellowships. They have a very attractive salary, a budget for research costs and management costs of the proposal. For individual fellowships, you can choose either an academic host organisation like a university or a publicly funded research organisation or somewhere like CERN. Or you can choose a non-academic host organisation, so somewhere like industry or a non-governmental organisation or a charity. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next slide. So eligible researchers for this programme are those who at the call deadline have a doctoral degree or have at least 4 years of full-time research experience after the degree that would allow you to begin PhD studies. So what that means is, if you have a master's degree and you would like to apply for this program, you also have to prove that you have 4 years of full-time research experience after your master's degree in order to be eligible. A number of people have asked me since yesterday's webinar about whether this kind of funding can be used to fund PhD studies, and unfortunately it cannot. It is for people who either want to carry out research after the PhD or people who are not on a PhD research track. At the end of the presentation, I have some information about finding out about PhD funding and opportunities in Europe. There are no age limits for this programme, and there are no upper experience limits, so it's not just for people at the early stage of their research career. In order to be eligible for the programme, you need to comply with the mobility rule about moving countries, and as we move through the presentation, I will explain a little bit more. There are two kinds of individual fellowship. There is the European Fellowship, which allows researchers anywhere in the world to either move within Europe from one European country to another, or from any country in the world into Europe for a fellowship that lasts between 1 and 2 years long. The second option is the Global Fellowship Programme, and that's for researchers who are currently here in Europe at the moment, who would like to go outside Europe to somewhere like America or Australia or Japan to do a period of research and return back to Europe at the end of the fellowship for 12 months. So the total duration of a global fellowship would be between 2 and 3 years, and the last 12 months would be back in Europe. When we say Europe in the context of this programme, we mean the 28 EU member states and the 14 countries that have associated themselves to Horizon 2020. These are places like Norway, Turkey, Tunisia, Switzerland, Ukraine, and you can find a list of those associated countries on the EU's participant portal. I will give you the link to that in a moment. So let's look more closely at the European fellowships. European fellowships can last for between 12 and 24 months. And they are open to researchers from outside Europe, and we call those third countries in the Horizon 2020 lexicon. And they are allowed to apply for a European fellowship, whether you are currently based outside Europe or whether you are a non-European researcher who's currently based in a European country. You don't have to be currently living in Europe. What you need to find, and it's very important, is to find a host organisation and a supervisor in Europe who supports your application. So you cannot submit this application on your own. You need to talk to the host organisation, talk to the supervisor, and get their agreement to support your application. And the Net4Mobility programme can help with that, and I'll tell you about that later. Within the European Fellowship, we have 4 different panels that you can apply for. First of all, we have the Standard European Fellowship, and that's open to people who are either coming to Europe or moving within Europe from one European country to another. There's a mobility rule that applies with this particular programme, and that's where you can only apply with a host in a country where you've lived for no more than 12 months in the 3 years before the call deadline of 14th September 2016. So what that means is, if you really want to apply for a fellowship with the UK, you have to be able to show that you haven't been in the UK for 12 months in the 3 years before the call deadline. The second option is Career Restart, and again, that's for people who are coming to or moving within Europe. And this is open to people who have taken a career break, so people who have been away from research for any reason, for family reasons, for work reasons, maybe you're from a country where you must do military service for a year or so. So at least 12 months before the call deadline, if you've been out of research, we have a special panel for those people. And they relax the mobility rules so that in this case, you can only apply with the host in a country where you've lived for no more than 3 years in the 5 years before the call deadline. So if you'd really like a fellowship in somewhere like Germany, you have to be able to show that you haven't been in Germany for any more than 3 years in the 5 years before the call deadline. You can, of course, have spent no time in Germany at all, and of course you would be eligible. But what it means is that if you've recently moved to Germany, you may still be eligible to apply, even though you've been in the country for a little while. The third option is something called the reintegration panel, and that's for those who wish to or recently have relocated into Europe from outside. So these are people who must be a European citizen or national, or somebody who has previously been working long-term in research, so 5 years or more in Europe before they go. So if you imagine a scenario where you have a researcher who is originally from India, And they spend 4 years in the UK completing a PhD, and then 2 years in Austria doing postdoctoral research. In this case, they have 6 years of research work in Europe. Then that person went to Australia for a postdoctoral period for 2 years. Because they've been away and they have previous long-term residency in Europe, they would be able to apply to come back to a European country under the special reintegration panel. And again, that relaxed rule about no more than 3 years in the 5 years in the host country applies in this case. The final option is a really new one for the Marie Skłodowska-Curie Actions, and that's the Society and Enterprise Panel. And that's people who are coming to or moving within Europe, but in this case, the host must be somebody outside academia. So instead of applying for this with a university or a public research organisation, you apply for this fellowship with a company, a non-governmental organisation, a community organisation, maybe a museum, maybe a library, maybe a national archive. There really are no limits on the kind of organisations that you can apply with. And again, we have this rule about the host country, but it's relaxed, so no more than 3 years in the 5 years before the call deadline. So if you imagine that you moved 1 year ago to Ireland and you would really like to stay here for a fellowship, you would be able to apply with a company that maybe you have met through your research work in Ireland for a Society and Enterprise Panel fellowship to remain in Ireland, but moving from a university into non-academia, into an industry setting. So I have some scenarios here about the European fellowships and whether people will be eligible. So if you imagine a researcher poses this question: I will submit my doctoral thesis in October 2016. Am I eligible? I will have 3 years of research experience by the call deadline. And the answer here, unfortunately, as this researcher would not be eligible this year, because at the call deadline of the 14th September 2016, they must either have their PhD or 3 years of research experience. And in this case, the researcher has neither. But they could wait until September 2017 and apply in the next call. The second example is about the mobility rule. And this is where a researcher from Brazil explains that they have lived in Brazil all their life until January 2016, when they moved to France to carry out postdoctoral research. They want to know, can they apply in 2016 for a European fellowship to remain in France? And the answer is yes in this case, because looking at the mobility rule of being no more than 12 months in the past 3 years in the host country, this person is eligible because they will have been in France for 9 months in the last couple of years, they can apply. Equally, if that person had not moved to France and was stayed in Brazil all that time, they would still be eligible to come to France for this fellowship. If you have any eligibility questions, you can look at the Marie Skłodowska-Curie Actions blog that's operated by Net4Mobility, and the link is given there. And you can also contact the National Contact Point either in your own country or in the country where you would like to do a fellowship, and they should be able to advise. The second option that we have in this programme is the global fellowships. So that's of duration 24 to 36 months. And this involves 2 organisations in 2 countries. It involves a partner organisation outside Europe, and you would spend the first 1 to 2 years of the fellowship there, and a beneficiary organisation in Europe, and you'd spend the last 12 months of the fellowship there. So if you would really like to do a fellowship where you would spend 2 years, for example, in Harvard University in the US, and then return to Oxford University in the UK, you can do this through this programme if you are eligible. So this one is open to, again, nationals or citizens of a European country or long-term residents, so people who've had more than or equal to 5 years of research work in Europe at the call deadline. So again, if you're that Indian person who has been in Europe, has done 4 years of a PhD in the UK and 2 years of postdoctoral research in Austria, this person has more than 5 years of research work in Europe and will be eligible for a global fellowship to go to Harvard and to come back to the UK. There is a mobility rule here, but it actually applies to the country outside Europe. So in that scenario, the researcher would have to prove that they had been in the US, living in the USA, for no more than 12 months in the 3 years before the call deadline, which again is the 14th September 2016. Another aspect that you can have during any of your fellowships, so either a global fellowship or a European fellowship, is that you can spend time in another organisation outside of your main host organisation. And what the Commission would like to see is that this takes place in a different sector. So if your main fellowship is hosted by a university, that you might spend time in a company or a non-governmental organisation or some other organisation. And you're allowed to, if your fellowship is 18 months or less long, spend a maximum of 3 months away. And if your fellowship is more than 18 months long, you can spend a maximum of 6 months away. And you don't have to go for a block of 6 months. You can split it into several shorter periods depending on your own needs. So one thing that's very important to understand is that an individual fellowship is more than just a research project. It's a career development fellowship, and it should include the following elements. So training through research through an individual project that you will carry out during the fellowship. It should also contain training on additional scientific skills such as new techniques, instruments, etc. It should contain information on transferable skills such as communication skills, intellectual property rights, entrepreneurship, and how you plan to acquire those kind of skills that will help you in your future academic or career outside academia as well. You also should put in some plans to get involved in linking in with other sectors, so perhaps through a secondment or by just working in collaboration maybe with an industry partner during the fellowship. They also like to see you getting involved in the research and financial management of the fellowship. Also getting involved in organising and taking part in events, including events that are designed to promote research and research life to the public, people who don't know anything about science but might be interested in it. They also like to see you getting involved in being trained in hot topics such as gender in research, ethics issues, research integrity and open science. And all this will be managed by a career development plan that you will prepare at the start of your fellowship and will be supported by your supervisor and host organisation to do so. So now the big question, how much funding will I receive? So there are two different cost categories, costs for the researcher and then institutional costs. I'll look at the institutional costs first. So you will receive €800 per month for the costs of research, training and networking. So that includes research costs, maybe buying a computer, travelling to conferences, paying for a training course, etc., etc. The host organisation will get €650 a month, and that's to cover the costs of managing your fellowship. Then there's a researcher's salary. So your salary will be made up of the amounts for living allowance, mobility allowance, and if applicable, family allowance in the table. Now, the family allowance is only given to researchers who either have children or who have a legal relationship with another person, so a marriage or a civil partnership or any other kind of legally recognised partnership. If you just have a long-standing partner with no formal relationship, no legally recognised relationship, unfortunately you would not be eligible for the family allowance unless you happen to have children, and in which case you would be eligible because of the children. There is a cost of living correction factor that is applied to the living allowance to account for different costs of living in each country. So if you went to a country where there was a very expensive, high cost of living, a place like the UK, you would get a slightly higher living allowance. If you went to a country like Romania where the cost of living is lower, you would get a slightly lower living allowance. However, one thing to note is that you will not receive these exact amounts in the table as your take-home salary. The take-home pay changes depending on the particular country that you go to, depending on the taxation and social security and pension regime in that country. So you should ask the national contact point in the host country. For example, if it's Germany, the German national contact point should be able to give you an estimate of what your real salary will look like. So now information on how you should apply. If you are applying for a European fellowship, you need to gain the agreement of a European host organisation and a supervisor in that organisation to submit the fellowship application with them. If you are successful, the host organisation signs a contract with the European Commission for your fellowship, and then they employ you as a member of their research staff. They pay you your salary and they make available your research costs. For the global fellowship, you need to have another organisation too. So again, you find a European host and a supervisor who agree to support you. And then you need to find a non-European host. So in the example I gave earlier, you would need to get the agreement from the University of Oxford and from Harvard University, and two people there, two supervisors, to support your application. Again, the European host would sign a contract with the European Commission if you are successful. and the non-European host will sign an agreement with the European host. The European host will employ you as a research member of staff, and while you are outside of Europe, say at Harvard, they will just send you on a secondment agreement, and you will continue to receive your salary from the European host organisation, and perhaps part of the research cost will be transferred out to, say, Harvard. The reason for this is that the European Commission does not want you to have any break in your social security, pension rights, etc., because you've been away from the EU. Now we have some information on the proposal. So there are 10 pages in the main proposal. There is the excellence, there is impact, and there's an implementation section. There are 5 pages for the researcher's CV. And then there's an ethics section. So if there's any ethical issues in relation to your research, if you're going to carry out research on animals or involving human subjects, you have to fill out this section. And then there's also a section where you fill out a table with details of each host organisation participating in the proposal. In terms of submitting the application, it's an all online submission. It comes via the EU participant portal, so it's an online page where you go in and you submit and find all the details of the application. The most important document that you need to find is the guide for applicants, and this includes the template for preparing the proposal, and you'll find this on the participant portal in the section on H2020 calls, and you need to look for the call identifier H2020 MSCA IF 2016. So let's look now and see how the application is evaluated. The application is evaluated using international peer review. So the proposals are read and scored by at least 3 experts in your research area, and then they have a consensus meeting to agree on scores and comments, and all the proposals are ranked in a list. They do this using 8 different disciplinary evaluation panels. So because we cover all areas of research, obviously if you're a chemistry researcher, it wouldn't be very fair for your application to be sort of compared with someone in social sciences and humanities. So they use 8 different evaluation panels and 8 different sets of experts, and your proposal will only be ranked with the ones in your panel, and you choose the panel when you submit the application. In terms of what happens afterwards, when you submit the application on the 14th September at the very latest, you will get your results in February 2017. If you are successful, the host organisation will need to finalise the grant agreement and paperwork with the European Commission by May 2017. You will need to talk to them and arrange a start date to begin your fellowship, and you can do that in May 2017, or you can postpone typically up to September 2018 if that suits you better. If you're not successful, you can reapply to the 2017 call or to the 2018 call as long as you were still eligible, and you will receive feedback from the first application to improve the new application. In terms of finding a host organisation, there are a couple of things you can do. The EU's Your Access website has a jobs section where many organisations around Europe are posting an expression of interest saying, we are really interested in finding talented researchers in the following areas to apply with us for a Marie Skłodowska-Curie Fellowship. And you can look at those and contact the host directly using the contact details given in Your Access. You'll find similar offerings on the Net4Mobility website as well. You can also use traditional networking methods like things like LinkedIn or ResearchGate or academia.edu, or you can just send emails, you can make phone calls, you can contact people that you know in your field are very good and you would like to work with. In terms of helping you with your application, Net4Mobility is a network of worldwide national contact points for Marie Skłodowska-Curie Actions. There will be some in the European host countries, so if you would really like to go to Italy, you can contact the Italian National Contact Point. You may also have a Marie Skłodowska-Curie National Contact Point in your home country, so if you were in Argentina, you can contact our colleague Inez, who will be able to advise you. There's a full list of national contact points available on the participant portal website. You also will probably find that the host organisations in the European host will have research support offices who may be able to assist you. There are also a range of bilateral EU cooperation projects who may be able to provide advice too. As an example of the kind of supports that are available in countries outside Europe, I can tell you about what my Egyptian colleagues offer in this area. So they have a dedicated national portal for EU-Egypt STI cooperation, and a specific section on information for Marie Skłodowska-Curie Actions. They have a Marie Curie support office to help Egyptian researchers to apply. You also can find information on social media on Facebook, and they have publications which can help as well. So this is just an example of what one country offers, and so you can obviously have a look, contact the National Contact Point in your own country and see what support is available in your country. Finally now, I'm going to talk about some additional funding streams for these experienced researchers, so these people who have a PhD or have 4 years of experience after their undergraduate degree who are not pursuing a PhD program. So there are many fellowship programs which are offered by regional organisations in a particular part of a European country, by national organisations, and also by international organisations, places like CERN and also the European Molecular Biology Organisation. And these are co-funded by Marie Skłodowska-Curie Actions. So part of the funding comes from Marie Skłodowska-Curie, and part of the funding comes from their own budget of that regional, national or international organisation. Each programme is unique and offers a different opportunity, and they offer all open calls on the Your Access website, and you can keep an eye out for those. It's possible to set a search alert on Your Access, which will send you an email every time something appears that looks like it would be interesting to you. Lastly, if you're someone who is not eligible for or not interested in an individual fellowship, and you would like to find the opportunity to complete a master's degree or a PhD in Europe, you can have a look at the following websites. So there's a very good website called findaphd.com. There's also the website of the Erasmus Mundus programs that are funded by the European Commission. And there's the Your Access website also. Your Access also lists all opportunities to join a Marie Skłodowska-Curie Actions Innovative Training Network. It's another kind of funding offered by Marie Skłodowska-Curie Actions, but in this case the funding goes to a network of host organisations, and when they have the funding, they then publish vacancies, job adverts, for researchers to join those and do a period of training, which usually results in a master's or a PhD degree, typically PhD. And you will find information on ITN, as we call it, at that link, and the vacancies are on youraccess.eu. Your Access also lists all opportunities to join a Marie Skłodowska-Curie Actions co-fund doctoral programme. So in addition to the co-fund fellowship programmes, we have some new co-fund doctoral programmes which are currently recruiting researchers to join and complete a PhD within their network. So that's it for my contribution. I was hoping to speak for half an hour, and I think I was 28 minutes, so I'm quite happy with that. Thank you very much for that. What I'm going to do now is hand over to Valerie Heffernan, who's going to give her presentation, and then I'm going to start answering some of the questions that you've been typing into the facility there. So just bear with me for one moment while I change over and hand the floor to Valerie.
Good evening, everyone, or good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how applications for Marie Skłodowska-Curie Actions are evaluated, particularly the individual fellowships. There are, as Jennifer already mentioned, 3 phases in the evaluation process. There is an individual phase, where your application is allocated to 3 different evaluators, and each of those evaluators looks at the application on an individual basis. They don't have access to each other's reports whilst they're doing that, and they write up an individual assessment report and submit that to the Commission. After that, after the Commission has received all 3 individual reports, there's a consensus phase and a meeting where the 3 evaluators come together and discuss the merits of the application, discuss its strengths and weaknesses, and they decide on a list of pointers, a list of strengths and weaknesses, and scores that are associated with those strengths and weaknesses. And at that point, the rapporteur, one of the 3, prepares a consensus report, which reports on the findings of the 3 from the consensus meeting. This report goes back to the Commission, and on the basis of this report, the consensus report, the Commission prepares an evaluation summary report, and that report will be passed on to you. And so after your application has been evaluated by all 3 evaluators and a consensus report has been written up, you will get a very detailed report on the merits of your application and its strengths and its weaknesses. And you'll also get scores for each of the sections. These are the criteria against which your application is evaluated. And this is no secret. I'm not sharing any state secrets here. This is actually, these criteria are published in the guide for applicants. And so you should familiarize yourself with them. I suppose, as Jennifer emphasized, this is not a traditional research fellowship, and that's something to bear in mind. There are 11 categories against which your application is scored. And a lot of people would spend a lot of time in the category on the top on the left, the quality and credibility of the research innovation project, in other words, on the research itself. And that's certainly important. But there are 10 other categories that also need to be top-notch in order to be considered for this fellowship. So it's important, for example, that you show that you have a clear training plan, that you're absolutely planning to gain new skills and to transfer your existing knowledge to the European host during the fellowship. You need to show that the supervisor you've chosen is of excellent quality and that the research group you'll be working with and the institution you'll be working with are very relevant for the project that you will be undertaking during your fellowship. You need to show that you have the capacity to carry out the project. You need to show that you are one of Europe's that you are one of the best and brightest researchers coming into Europe to bring your quality and transfer it to the European host. In terms of impact, you need to show that this fellowship will have a real impact on your career prospects and your possibility of securing permanent employment or further funding or enhancing your career moving forward. You need to show that you are aware of how you intend to disseminate the results of the project, both amongst the scientific community and amongst a broader general public. So you need a dissemination plan, a scientific dissemination plan, and you also need a communication plan, which is showing how you will communicate the results to the broader public. And in terms of implementation, you will be expected to show that you have a very clear work plan for your project, that you are clear on what you'll be doing at every phase during the project. You need to show that the tasks and resources are appropriately allocated within that work plan. You need to be able to show how the project will be managed and that all of the infrastructure is clearly available to you during your time when you're working on this project during your fellowship. Okay, so I prepared some questions for you to think about as you prepare your application. This list is not exhaustive, but these are just questions you might ask yourself as you're beginning to think about how to put together a persuasive proposal. So thinking about the research, thinking about your project, it's very important that you have a very clear description of the research project. You need to be able to explain it to someone who is an expert in the broader field of your research, but not necessarily an expert in the very narrow area that you work on. So you can assume that the expert evaluated to the physics panel, the expert has a broad knowledge of physics, but they might not be a subject expert in the you work on. So you need to ensure that you explain clearly how your research project fits into the bigger picture and what the value of it is. You need to be able to show what the methodologies are that you intend to employ and explain them clearly and justify their use for your project. You need to show how your project builds on the existing research. So what is the current research in the field? How will your project build on it, and how will it further research in the field? It's very important that you emphasize the relevance of your project. Think about this as an investment. You're asking the European Commission to invest a substantial amount of money in this project. So why is it so important that this project be funded? What is so important about it? And also, why should it be funded now? Think about the timeliness of the project. As Jennifer mentioned, training is a very important part of the fellowship as well. And so this is a really I think for an early stage researcher in particular, a really great opportunity to think about what kinds of new skills could you develop that could really have an impact on your career. So I would advise you to take a long, cold look at your CV and your profile and think about where are the gaps in your profile? Where are the gaps in your CV that you could work on in the 2 years of the fellowship? Also, thinking about what kinds of new directions do you want to take your research in? How do you see yourself extending yourself in the course of this fellowship? And you develop a training plan, working together with your supervisor and your host institution, which is aiming to meet your training needs in the course of the fellowship. So the training should be very clearly aligned to the project goals and also to your training needs as shown by the potential gaps in your CV. Training is something that of course you will get as you're working on the project, but it shouldn't just be about learning through doing. Training through research is important, but it's also important to think about formal training courses. They might be available through your host institution, but in some cases you might also have to go beyond the host institution to get specialized training. And of course, as Jennifer mentioned, you do have a budget for that as well, and it's important to bear that in mind. So think big and be ambitious with this. Think about what would really make a big difference to your CV and your profile, make you more employable, or enable you to secure further funding, or enable you to enhance your career moving forward. Transferable skills are very important, bearing in mind that not everyone is going to manage to secure a job in academia. What kinds of skills could you develop that might make you eligible for a job in industry, with an NGO, or outside of academia as well? It's also important that you explain how the training will be monitored. You may find, as you begin to work on the research project, that new training needs emerge. And so you need to show in the proposal that you have allowed for this, that there will be continuous monitoring of your training program, that you'll have an opportunity to sit down with your supervisor and talk to him or her when new training needs emerge to talk about how they might be met. Transfer of knowledge is something you're also asked to talk about in the proposal. So you might have to think about what kind of expertise it is that you're bringing to the host group or to the European institution. And thinking quite practically, how will transfer of knowledge take place? How do you plan to transmit your knowledge to the European Is it going to be through carrying out work on the project? There is always that element of learning through research. But you might also think about, for example, offering workshops, offering courses, taught modules, supervising research students, perhaps undergraduate or postgraduate projects. And this might be a way of transferring knowledge to the host institution. And also, it's nice if you can show that there are opportunities for long-term collaboration, long-term transfer of knowledge beyond the lifetime of the fellowship, because this will indicate to the evaluators that you're thinking that this is a long-term investment. It's not going to be something that will only have a lifespan of 2 years. You need to be able to show that your supervisor and your chosen host institution have a level of expertise in the particular field that you've chosen. And you need to be able to demonstrate this through things like peer-reviewed publications, grants that your host supervisor has secured, and so on. A lot of applications would detail the quality of a university overall or quality of a research group, but it's important to be specific. It's important to show how they are the very best research groups in the fields that you want to work in. Again, you're asked to give some information about the infrastructure in the host institution, the types of facilities available to you there, and also the international collaborations of the host. It's important not to be generic, but to be specific to the project. What specific supports are going to be available to you at the host institution as you work on this project? And also be clear about the practicalities and the arrangements for supervision. How will these happen? How often will you meet with your supervisor? What will happen, for example, if either one of you is traveling, perhaps to work on research to an archive or going to a conference? How are you going to manage supervision in those cases? Your profile is important in this. These are fellowships that are aimed at the best and brightest scholars, both the best and brightest within Europe and aimed at bringing the best and brightest scholars worldwide to Europe, to bring their expertise into Europe. And so you need to present yourself as one of the best and brightest. This is not a time to be modest, so this is a time to sing your own praises. Use all of the pages available to you for that. Use the suggested categories. It just makes things clear for the evaluators. It makes sure that they can see that you are fulfilling all of the criteria that they're being asked to evaluate. For example, clearly identify any peer-reviewed articles that you've published. Make sure that you label them as peer-reviewed articles. It needs to be entirely clear from your proposal why you are the best possible candidate to carry out this particular research project, and also how this project, this fellowship, will broaden your research expertise and deepen your research expertise. So there needs to be a sense that you're not doing more of the same, that you're doing something that's going to enable you to develop new skills in the course of the fellowship. Impact is another thing that you have to address in your proposal. You've got to talk about the ways in which this project will benefit the wider community. So thinking, first of all, about the impact of the fellowship on your career, perhaps the way in which the new training will contribute to your profile, to your CV, and to your career development. And it's important that you present this as something that will be an investment in you, that it will be value for money, that there will be a clear result at the end of it, that at the end of these 2 years, you will have enhanced your skills in such a way that you will be more employable and that you will be more valuable as a result. Think about the impact on research in the field. How will the publications that come out of your project impact on the field more broadly? The research results, any patents? Will there be new knowledge developed in the course of your research project? Think about the impact also on the universities involved, and in the case of a secondment, on the partners involved. Will this contribute to the development of new networks, or will it reinforce existing networks? Is there a possibility of longer-term collaboration beyond the lifetime of the fellowship? And is the benefit to all organisations mutual? Will this be something that will continue and will be of benefit to all of the partners moving forward? In particular, in your case where you're coming into Europe, think about how your project is going to contribute to European excellence and competitiveness in your field. How is your project and how is your fellowship and your coming to Europe going to contribute to the development of the European Research Area, the ERA? And also, as I mentioned, you've got to show how your project will be of interest to the general public. And I suppose it's important to note it's not enough to say, for example, that you're going to host a dissemination event, an academic conference, and this will be open to the public. You need to show how you're going to go out of your way to interest and engage the general public. And that might be through non-traditional or non-academic channels. You might be thinking, for example, about using a website to engage the public, or using social media or personal media, a blog, for example, to engage the general public. So give some thought to ways in which you might reach out beyond the academic community with your project. And as I say, the important thing to bear in mind is that you need to show that this project has a clear benefit in many different ways, thinking of those 5 different areas. You are also asked to show that you have a clear plan for the implementation of your project. So you might ask yourself, what will you be working on at every stage of the project? You need to have a clear work plan. You need to explain what you're going to be working on and how all of the various different parts and work packages work together as part of a work plan. You need to use a Gantt chart to give a very visible description of a very visible image of what you'll be working on at various different stages. And bear in mind that your Gantt chart should also take into account things like training activities and dissemination activities, communication activities, because they will take up your time and energy at various times during the project. You need to identify clear and measurable milestones that will be used to monitor the progress of your project and that you will be able to discuss with your supervisor to show that you're making progress. Deliverables, you need to show things like, for example, plans for publication, and not vague plans for publication, but details of what you intend to publish and when roughly you intend to publish it by. So you don't have to give a specific date, the 15th of September 2018, but you do have to say that in approximately month 12 or month 15 of the project, you will have written the draft for an academic article, for example, or you will have written a blog post. You might think of deliverables in terms of courses that you would teach, and again it's important to give dates and details for those. So in the 3rd semester of your 4-semester stay in the country, you will give a master's level seminar on something along those lines. And plans for dissemination events, if there's workshops or conferences that you're going to host, you need to say what approximately you'll be dealing with, what audiences they're aimed at, and when approximately they will take place. It's important also that you give some information about the arrangements for monitoring the progress of your project and revision. If you find, for example, that you're not managing to keep up with your work plan, how will you deal with that? And you need to show, for example, that you've taken into account risk management. What happens? What are the potential risks to the successful implementation of this project? And how will you mitigate those risks? How are you going to plan for that in advance? So overall, it's important that you don't just have a clear goal for your project, but you also have a very clear plan for how you're going to get there. And some final pointers. Register soon on the participant portal. Jennifer gave you the link in her slides. You can download the templates for the proposal from the participant portal. So register soon, download those templates and start working off those. It's important that you adhere to the suggested font and margin sizes. Don't exceed the page limits. If your application goes over the 10 pages, the additional text won't be taken into account in assessing your application. Pitch your application at an educated reader who might not be an expert in your field. It's very important to address all of the sub-criteria in your proposal, bearing in mind, as I showed you at the beginning, that there are 11 criteria against which your application is being scored. And I would say make life easy for the evaluators, label everything very clearly for them. And do bear in mind that, as I mentioned already, not all of the expert evaluators will be subject experts. They will, of course, be experts in the broad field of your research, but they might not be experts in the very narrow field of your particular project. And I would say that that's a good thing, because sometimes evaluators can be so blown away by a research project that they can be blind to the broader context of it. And it's important to have someone point out some of the weaknesses perhaps in the management plan or in the work plan and things like that. It's important to write to an educated reader who has a broad knowledge of research in your field. Bear in mind also that not all of the expert evaluators will be native speakers of English. So this is not an opportunity to write very complex and complicated English that is difficult to read. Make sure that your English is very clear and very accessible, and that you make a clear and justifiable case for your project at all times. And I would suggest that you get feedback on your application before you submit it. Ask some of your colleagues, some of your fellow students, some of your friends and some of your family to read your application before you submit it, and use their pointers to improve the application. And finally, don't be put off if you don't get the grant first time. Use the feedback, use the evaluation summary report that you'll get, which is long and detailed, and use that to improve your application, reapply, and I'd say you have a much better chance of getting it the second time round. Okay, thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions if you want to put them in the question facility.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much, Valerie. And I'm just answering the questions here. If I see any that I think are really relevant to you, I will pass them over to you. Now what I'm going to do is pass over to Pablo. Pablo, are you ready?
Yes, I'm here.
Great. Okay. If you could just speak up a little bit, Pablo, because you're quite quiet.
So now it's better?
Yes, that is better. Yes. Thank you. Okay.
Okay.
We've lost your slides, Pablo.
Sorry?
There we go. You're back again.
I'm here.
Go ahead. Thank you.
Okay. So hello, everybody. So I'm here just to refresh some points I already mentioned and trying to explain how was my experience being a fellowship from Marie Curie. So this is like a summary of my research career. I was born in Rosario, Argentina. I'm also Italian, and there you can see my email if you have a further question. But just a summary of my career, I did a master in biotechnology in Argentina, then a PhD in biological science, also in my hometown. Then a start of postdoctoral stage in an institute in Rosario, and then I decided to go and try luck outside my country and decided to go to Switzerland, and I was working like a postdoctoral fellow in the Department of Biochemistry in the University of Zurich. And for that stage, I was lucky and have 2 fellowships. The beginning was the Novartis Foundation Fellowship, and the second one, and that's the reason why I'm talking to you today, is I have a Marie Curie Fellowship in this stage. And now I'm back again in Argentina. I have an assistant researcher position in the Argentina National Research Council. That was like going from the land from Leo Messi to the land of Roger Federer. So 2 of the most impressive sport guy in the world. But what kind of background do we also have? You can see here different aspect of common CV. fortunately, I was able to put some coins in each of these boxes, and this is something that you also need to think about, because these are the different aspects that can be evaluated during your proposal, be evaluated by the European Union. So why do you want to apply for this fellowship? First, there is something that was already mentioned. You can apply if you are from any country in the world. They support your mobility. And this is also a very important aspect. This is probably the best paid postdoctoral fellowship in Europe. There is no age limit. You will get money for doing research, for training, for networking, and also for the management of the project. You will get some money for mobility, and if you have family, that was my case also, you will get also some more euros for that. You can work on your own research project, and this is very important because you can decide in advance what kind of field you want to work with and design a work project with your future advisor and follow your idea. That's really, really nice for this fellowship. This is also controlled by the EU, and for all these reasons, we can say that this is very prestigious, and this is obviously good for your CV afterwards. For me, one of the most important aspects is how to identify your host organization. So here it's crucial to have a very good network. Obviously, it's important to go to meetings, apply for different lists, from email distribution lists, ask to colleagues of your PhD supervisor, and to have an idea of what are the possible destinations. And also you can have a look in this expression of interest for hosting Marie Curie Fellows. So these are people who really want to have people to apply to get a fellowship. But where? And for this, you need to find your own motivation. So in this case, I just make some points. First, you can think, okay, I want to go to this institution or this group. And for this, you have different reasons. For example, the topic, the scientific topic that's doing this group. The ranking of the university can be also a reason. The infrastructure, the CV of your supervisor, how is the group composition. It's also important if you go through these lines that you can contact members of this group, and it's even better if it's already a Marie Curie Fellow on that group. But you can also try to decide where to go according to the place, because maybe you like culture, language, you want to change your quality of life. Yes, there is also a point in the income. And for this, I want to stress that you need to check this correction coefficient about the money that you will get at the end, and also the taxes that can be deducted from your salary. You need to check also the cost of living in the country that you want to go. For people from outside Europe, there's also an extra aspect that you need to check if you need a visa to enter and to work in that country. So this is my list of some tips for applying for the fellowship. Many of those were already mentioned, but you need to be sure that you read the last call documents. And obviously, you need to use the official template. And when you go through this template, you will start to get familiar with all the jargon, so the terminology that we use in this. What else? So you need to also be very careful about the criteria weight. So not everything is about excellence. So you will need to invest a lot of time in all the rest of the point of the criteria for the evaluation. I think it's very important, try to think what is really new for you and what new skills you will get at the end. Try to be realistic and have very definite objectives in your career. Think about the this fellowship can have in your future. Obviously, you need to design a project with state-of-the-art research in mind. Okay, and this is one shot, so you cannot make any justification afterwards, but you can reapply, obviously, the year after. Try to be concrete, but also that is easy to understand for anyone. Don't use generic phrases, and please use a lot of examples, charts, and figures. Use the statistic if you want and quantify everything. Try to start as soon as possible. For me, were more than 6 weeks to prepare all the paperwork, not only the scientific project. And also pay attention that you will need to write the proposal together with your future supervisor, and it's very common that they are very, so this is something you need to think about before. And obviously you need to also follow the aims of the particular framework program that you are applying now. How you can ask for some support. So obviously there's this national contact point is really important. I was lucky and I have a huge hand from people from Switzerland. The national contact point there are really nice, and also for your access they give you a lot of information. Now you can also have help from the Marie Curie Alumni Association. So there are people who already work in having this fellowship like me, and there are regional chapters in many of countries of the world, so you can ask in your country. So alumni, and in general there are people that are really willing to help. Was already mentioned, but I want to stress that giving your proposal to a colleague is really useful, and also to your PhD advisor, and try to get feedback as soon as possible. No, but what happened when you're a Marie Curie Fellow in Europe? So this is really a continuous learning process. So you learn many different things, and only by experiencing a place and his people firsthand, so being there, you can understand a new culture. And this is also something that you only realize after some months of living in Europe. The working style is different, so you need to adapt or adjust your working style to the style of the institution that you're working with. For many of those, there is also a language barrier, but this is also can be an opportunity because there are many practice groups, or you can make tandem when you learn the new language and you teach another one your language. So this was really nice in my experience. I need to admit that living abroad can be difficult, not only practically but also mentally, because you need to uproot yourself from everything you already know and go to the new place when everything is new. But at the end you will get to know yourself a lot better. Can be scary, but it's also very liberating at the end. But after the fellowship, what do you have? By sure you will improve your technical and personal skills. You will learn to be independent, to be proactive, and to be self-confident too. By sure you will improve your network, and you can build a lot of links to make future collaborations, and this is really important when you are from outside Europe. Another extra point, although this is an individual fellowship, after going through all this process, you will get ready to apply for a real grant when you come back to your country. And in my case, it really boosts my career towards an independent research position. Just a few final words. This can be a long and hard procedure, but it's really worth it. So please get in contact with the scientific person that you want to work with, make an outstanding proposal, and work really hard on that. because living abroad makes you conscious of everything, and it's really a sensory overload of new information, and you will see many things from a different perspective, not only from your scientific career, and mainly for your personal development. So I hope that this helped for you. I wait here for any questions. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much, Pablo. I think that was really useful. I'm going to switch the ownership of the webinar back to me. So thank you, everybody. I have been answering your questions just for the last sort of half an hour while the other presenters have been presenting. Just to say, quite a few of the questions have been about individual eligibility. So am I eligible? Here is my situation. The best thing to do in this situation is to send a message to the National Contact Point in the country that you would like to work in, and they can give you advice on this in particular. Some other questions that we have gotten have been about the success rate of getting a fellowship. Around 14% of proposals, so 14% of proposals were funded in the 2015 call. There also have been some questions about whether certain research areas are more preferred, or there are the list of research areas. Just to say again that all research areas are covered by the Marie Skłodowska-Curie Action's Individual Fellowships Programme. And there is no priority given to any particular research area. So you have the same chance of success if you were applying in life sciences as if you were applying in something like physics or in social sciences or in the humanities as well.